Man, what did you send me? I was driving when you sent it to me. What did you send me?
Oh, the Heinrich it's a poet. I was reading the book this morning, The History of Jewish Comedy, and it was in the Middle Ages, and it was talking about this poet um, uh, Heinrich Heine, and he was talking about uh, humor in relation to Jews that converted to Christianity, and so this particular guy Heinrich Heine was this German
Oh,
Jew
human
who
humor in relationship to Jews
who
who can.
converted to Christianity
Huh. Okay.
throughout, and so he well, it was actually this was in the Romantic era that I was actually in, and Heinrich Heine was this um, Jew who converts to Lutheran. You know, he becomes a Lutheran um, in like his 30s, and um, he but he was exiled for his um, he was exiled for his politics early on in his life, and so he'd spent a bunch of time in Paris when Napoleon was in charge, and so he came back. Uh, he came back. He ends up converting to Lutheranism and uh, becomes a big proponent of German nationalism. And so this is why it was something that I shared with you, was because his arguments for German nationalism were mostly based on the fact that the conservatives, who because there was no Germany yet, Germany was still
The
a
Weimar
whole
Republic at that point is
yeah,
that
it was a whole series of small states, not states meaning different countries that all spoke German, that had sort of an agreement on how they were dealing with one another, and but the response, so a lot of the progressives who were the nationalists at the time that were arguing for a united German centralization of the government of all of the German states into one place, they were taking over media, and so the conservatives who wanted things to stay um, the way they traditionally had been, what they did was they used the law to make it illegal, or they basically just took over the media with the coercive power of the law. And then all of the Christians were like, no, that's not right. The press needs to be free because they're the fourth estate. If you try and so all of the Christians jumped onto the nationalist bandwagon over the free press issue, because the traditionally the press was free by law, because it was their job to keep the everyone informed so that you could have the balance of powers between the church, the um, the church, the state, and the people. That was the press's job. Well, the and so then they all jump on board and say maybe we do need nationalism to protect the free press. And within one generation, you have World War One brimming, because nationalism brought with it a particular understanding of economics that caused World War One.
but what
And
all we wanted to do is to get the press free. We did it
right,
for
I know,
intentions of free press.
but they did it by creating a power that hadn't existed before, which was by centralizing power. And so the
That's
progressives,
Machiavellian, then, right?
it
That's
is.
that
So the
Machiavellian.
progressives
Yeah.
were that had been arguing for the centralization of power used this illegal in the sense of um, kind of that the way
Thank you.
uh, the way things had been done. They used that illegal move to clamp down and control the press by the different uh, different sort of royal houses of Germany, because there was a whole series of royal houses. The royal houses of Germany were the ones that were clamping down and trying to control the press. They used that illegal move to get all of the Christians who loved law to say, yeah, we should actually, maybe we do need nationalism to protect the law, because you've got these smaller governments that are breaking the law. And so yeah, it was a really interesting story. And but the use of humor amongst the progressives was a major reason, because they were the romantics, that loved all things German, and and had a funny sense of humor. And this this Jewish Lutheran um, was central in getting the Christians to jump on board and defend the free press, because he had seen basically post-revolution France under Napoleon, and really saw that you had some great stuff going on there. And so he was like, we need something like a unified France up here in Germany, that Napoleon brought about. But he wasn't there during the bloody parts of the revolution. He was there after the revolution had fallen apart, and Napoleon had been brought in to set things right with a really heavy hand. And he so it's a really, it was just I thought it was a really telling story. And I'd never heard of this particular poet. So
Okay, I want to. There's man, I should write this down because I don't want to lose this trail. Um, my mind just thought about when things go a particular direction, like we see them going right now in America, where our Constitution isn't followed. We don't even understand the difference between the powers of states, counties, cities, the federal government, relation between states to the federal government. We have no concept of all that. Everything is all, the economy is controlled by the government. So everything is out of whack. And then you have this, it's not really a deep state anymore. It's kind of just how we operate now. It's just,
yeah.
public.
It was
there
a
is
deep
no
state. It was a deep state like under Nixon. Now it's a surface state.
Yeah. Now it's just normal. And so then there is this natural inclination inside of a people for a person to come and just wreck shop. Where is Samson, right? Where is the king? Where is the man who's going to come and wreck shop and put everything back? And so when you see somebody who is a bold man, who is willing to fight like Trump, take a stand and lay some things right, it's easy for him, it's easy for you and anybody else to say yes. Finally, somebody is coming in, going to restore things back the way they were. But so in a way, I mean, I know it's not a one-to-one, but you can easily see how Napoleon can be wanted.
Right. Yeah. And that's what ended up happening is Napoleon was welcomed because the chaos was so uncomfortable. Um, and I think that's the temptation, is when the chaos is uncomfortable, to say we just gotta get rid of the chaos, when that's actually not a good enough argument. Like, we need less chaos. We do need less chaos, but replacing it with a loss, the I mean, it's hard to speak for Germany, but when you look at the trajectory that they ended up on, overall, it was a loss. The so you've got this really difficult situation where so instead of saying, let's go after the thing that's illegal and try and get that fixed, they go after, they say, we need an institution in which this won't happen again. I think I've told the story before, but when Enron came through and made their and took advantage of all those folks, and it was through their creative accounting. Um, you had you had people on the left, in particular the the representative of San Francisco, who what's her name? The why can't I think of the scary
You're,
lady?
you're not talking
she
about
she was
Pelosi.
yeah, Pelosi.
Oh
So
yeah.
Pelosi
Nancy
stood
Pelosi.
Pelosi stood up and she said, "This law is broken, or this law has been broken. We need a law that can't be broken. We need to rewrite the accounting law so that we have a law that can't be broken." So you think, what exactly are we talking about? So the law that previous law was called the Anderson Project, the accounting law, and that was written by my grandfather. He was an elder in a Lutheran church, and so that law caught Enron and sent people to jail. And Pelosi said that that law is not working because
Because it was
somebody
able.
was able to break it.
Yep.
Right? We need unbreakable laws, and that's a um, that's a different. It's a wholly, completely different understanding of laws and institutions and human nature and everything. So what you have going on in Germany at the time, and just throughout Europe and eventually in America, was we've got a problem in the institution. Let's get an institution that won't have problems, rather than saying, well, of course, it's it's the God designed obsolescence that all institutions have to go through. Back in 2000, 2000, I read an article by my uncle who's a Baptist pastor. He wrote an article called God's Planned Obsolescence about the institutions that humans build. All all have an expiration date. We don't know what it is when we're building it, but we can just assume this thing's got an expiration date. And if it's going to last long term, it's going to have to go through deaths and resurrections because it's a human institution, and humans have have a bent heart. So he said, that's why we trust in Jesus, not in any of the
Mm.
human institutions. And that when an institution starts to go wonky, um, you can fight for it, but you fight for it out of faithfulness, not out of hope. Right? The institution is not the hope. Jesus is the hope, and he tells us to fight for the institutions, and so we do it out of faithfulness, not because if this institution falls, then we have no hope. Yeah. And it's a view of institutions that says they can go through deaths and resurrections because they're human institutions, and in order to follow Jesus, a person has to go through deaths and resurrections, and an institution has to go through deaths and resurrections. It's got to take on the shape of its Lord and Savior. So we should expect that from all the institutions, but it's just like every death and resurrection, it's an uncomfortable thing. And to try and say we're going to build an institution that won't ever have to do that is to serve Demos rather than Jesus, so that.
Yeah, I was even thinking, while you were talking, I was thinking one of the most uncomfortable things you can put a conservative Christian American, generally speaking, in the most uncomfortable situation you can put them in, or make them kind of have to think or kind of be taken off, is to say, don't trust the Constitution more than Christ. Right.
Yeah.
And they'll be
Right.
like, well, I don't, but I mean, you got to have and then there's this uncomfortable merger, I think, in conservative American loving Christians with this trust of the Constitution as being a God-given document, not like the Bible, but I mean, it's close. It's like, man,
Right.
it's right. It's just like those two. And it's like, no, you don't understand. The word of God, the scripture, Christ, high above all of it. And all of these other institutions have to bend the knee,
Right.
period. Not
Right.
the end, right? but it's uncomfortable to
It
even
is.
the most conservative ones to be like, oh, because I think we're not being honest really in where we're holding. I love our Constitution. I really do. I'm grateful
Right.
for it in a lot of ways. I don't think that we had to have it. I'm probably an anti-federalist at the end of the day, baby. I probably, I lean that way. There's parts of me like, ooh, they was right. They was right.
Right.
But I'm grateful for this. It's what we have, and I'm willing to work with. I'm grateful for it, but I want to make sure that I keep the main things, the scriptures and the Word of God and God's law and God's standard always above everything else, far, far above everything else. And so long as what we make in our American institutions that are mimicking that are modeling that, then amen, right?
Right.
But not, oh, these two are, you know, no. But I think it makes Americans uncomfortable in a lot of ways to have to admit that so starkly, like just to make that very stark admission
Yeah.
about the two.
Well,
You know?
and I think, yeah, I think the Anti-Federalist Papers are more convincing than the Federalist Papers. I also think that the Constitution was then voted in as the law of the land. And so even if I got to go back and vote against it, it still would end up the law of the land.
Yeah.
And so you'd have to deal with it as the law of the land. And there's a legal way to improve the law, and there's an illegal way to try and improve the law. But we should always assume that human laws need to be improved, and that are, and so that shouldn't be as uncomfortable as it is. But it is pretty uncomfortable for most
It
American
is.
conservatives, and but I think that's because we don't have a better story to tell about the future, and so we're holding on to the story of the past. The I mean the I just came across just discovered a book. I haven't read it yet, but it's a new
Here
I
you
just
go. Got me already ready to go to
this is
Amazon to grab some more books because you
this isn't
discovered
one
it.
this isn't one that you look at and say, man, we've got to make sure and read this one. I don't think, but there was a science fiction book that kicked off the American Socialist the American Socialist Party. It was all around a late 1800s science fiction book where a person falls asleep and then wakes up in the year 2000, and everything's socialist. And they say, how did this happen? And he describes the long march through the institutions. I'd heard that phrase before, but I didn't know where it came from. It came from a science fiction book that basically converted all of these young folks to socialism and communism. And so when spies from the USSR started coming around looking for people to join up, they would do reading groups of that book, of this science fiction book, in order to gather people to the socialist to socialism. It
They
was
gave him
really interesting.
imagination. They gave
Yeah,
him
so
imagination.
they
Yeah.
gave but it was a people that didn't have a future facing story. Right? It was a very cynical, the conservatism was very cynical and had been upended by World War I and World War II, and they had walked away from any sort of story about the future that didn't involve the ultimate destruction of everything. And so you had these generations that were prepped for socialism by the cynicism of the previous generations, and all they needed was somebody to come and tell a believably optimistic story. And so they weren't fighting. They were willing to they were true believers in communism because their imagination said it's a better story. It's a more it's a more effective story. I mean, and if it weren't for guys like Walt Disney trying to fight back with a the beauty of family, the beauty
Wait,
of
what?
conservatism, they would have taken over a long time ago.
Wait, no, no, you so don't be doing stuff like that. Don't just be like, if it wasn't for Walt Disney, we all be socialists right now. I'm like, what? No, no, he was
Yeah.
just making Bambi. That's all he was doing. What you talking
No,
about?
he was a um he was the first whistleblower on communists trying to take over Hollywood.
You shut up.
Yeah, so
Does
he
he know that they
said,
won and they took Disney too?
well, because he was, you know, still in the middle of the fight. So um like the Jungle Book, he the whole thing is basically in opposition to Rousseau, right? So
What?
you've got, yeah, so you've got this kid out in the jungle, and you think and you meet him, and it's a Rousseauian paradise, right? There's no society. He's not going to have any sin. He's not going to have any, because society is caused by sin, and so he's out there, and it looks really great because he's trained by Baloo, and but then as things start to go wrong, um, you have this realization that uh, uh well, things start to go wrong because you've got this guy, the monkey, that comes along and says, I want to be like you, right? I want to be man. I want to, and so and this fight begins, and so you think, oh my gosh, this is a Rousseauian story, right? This all the setup, except for where does he actually take it? He ends up taking it to the to go to the actual society of people, right? So the that and what is it that finally fights against the animalistic nature? It's he meets a woman.
Oh, you shut
He
up.
sees his first woman,
You shut up.
right?
No. No.
He
No,
sees a girl,
Jason.
and he's like, "Oh, wait a second. I gotta tame this
No.
internal animalistic nature if I want any of that." And the song she sings to him is, I'll grow up, I'll be a mom, I'll stay at home, I'll take care of the dishes, I'll cook you food, and we'll build a beautiful life together, and then we'll go out and garden the world around us. Right? She sings that song to him, and he walks away from the animalistic um version of laissez-faire capitalism that you've got amongst the monkeys, and the fake Rousseauian um socialism that you have amongst the wolves and the panthers, right? He walks away from both of them to a home to have children and garden. It's beautiful. It's such a beautiful story because he splits down the middle, right? He doesn't say, what are our options, laissez-faire capitalism or socialism? He says, no, our options are families, right? That's what we need families where a beautiful woman and a strong man come together and bring each other's strengths into unity, and garden the world around them. It's such a great, and that was the last movie that Walt Disney himself controlled the story on.
Ah.
Right? So he
No,
so
don't you
it's
give me no
because
more. Don't you give me no more. I can't I gotta process this. Hold on.
so
No.
it's only it's,
Okay, so
he's the reason that we didn't become communist when everyone else did. It's Walt Disney.
two things from that. First, I didn't even know how much that shaped me growing up, right? Had no idea, but it had an impression on me that I wasn't even aware of watching
You,
Jungle Book, right?
you rewatch the song that she
We're watch
sings to
we're
him.
watching it for our Friday movie for family
Yeah.
night. This Friday is gonna be the Jungle Book.
So
Because
that the song she sings to him at the end, it's so beautiful, and it's so absolutely anti woke. It's but I mean
Okay.
that's not the point of it. It's not trying to it's just beautiful. He knows how beautiful your marriage is. He knows how beautiful it is when a young boy and a young girl fall in love with one another and then want to make a family together. He's just like it's so beautiful. That's my argument. It's gorgeous.
So again, two things. One, that's amazing that I never knew that. That blew my mind just now, and I'm still processing it. The second thing is we're screwed.
Right. Well, because we're
No, I
not
mean,
prepped to tell stories.
uh,
We yeah, conservative
we're screwed. Right?
Christians,
Like we're
we live in response to everything until we build a storytelling infrastructure and tell so parents can tell stories to their kids. So we're not completely screwed because we've still got that. But the storytelling infrastructure of our society has been taken over. Uh, and so I mean,
no one today is thinking. I'm sorry, Jason. Sorry, I got to interrupt you and just rant just for two. Just give me 2 seconds. No one today is thinking to themselves, "Hey, you know what? The best way to fight critical race theory is to tell beautiful stories, right? In
right.
opposition against it." No one is saying, "Hey, you know the way to fight Marxism right now? How about we write a cartoon?" Right? Like,
Yeah,
no, like the only reason that people are telling stories or trying to get into the movie industry is all reactive to um, we just need this, not woke. It's
right.
not, hey, we've lost the moral imagination of our people. And so they believe they have a cosmology breakdown of how the world works.
Yeah,
Let's tell stories that revive that cosmology so that they understand and have a moral imagination of what this world really is and what it should be. So then,
right.
if we tell stories, then we forget the post millennial side of it. What we tell stories is the world is damned, it's going to hell. Get up out of here as quick as you can. Like when the
Yeah,
rapture happens, like that's our moral imagination is left behind. That's
totally.
American Christianity moral imagination. Even
And
if we're not, acting like it in every way, that's influenced the way that we think.
it
That's
is. It's true.
insane.
We and but it's because we don't believe reality is beautiful anymore. And so we're not willing to we're not willing to learn the crafts that remind people that reality is actually beautiful. Because that's what we're fighting for is reality, right? We're arguing. I mean, uh, this is the way I think about it, at least, is reality is there. Our job is just to point to it and say, look how beautiful that is. Right? Reality
We got an easy job. We got an easy
right,
job.
yeah. So, um,
Yeah.
this is why you still had Christians able to, jump in and get to really high levels in Disney again in the '90s, because the the socialists took over in the late '60s and ruined Disney. So by the end of the '80s, they were making terrible stuff again, and or terrible stuff because they were trying to form reality rather than trying to embrace it, trying to
It
enjoy it.
worked. It worked.
It did, except for it ruined Disney, right? So they were losing
Right,
money,
right.
and so they had to bring in but there were Christians that got brought back in to make The Lion King to Mulan, some of these movies. It was a Christian storytelling group that got brought back into the heart of Disney and basically was able to revive Disney again. And then once they had the capital, they started pushing the Christians back out and getting bad at it again. Pixar had Christian folks starting it, telling the stories, writing the that kind of golden age Pixar movie. Um, and then they got brought into Disney again because Disney was losing itself. Um, so you've got this, same thing with yeah. So you've got this pattern where the progressives now, they own the institutions, but they can't actually continually tell stories because they want to
It's like
form
so
reality. They
it's like
don't.
socialism. It can
Right,
only
yeah.
last for so long because you
Yeah.
still need people working who are inventive and making money. And then after they're all
Yeah,
gone, you're like, well, what do we make and what do we do? And you
right.
dry up.
It's like Margaret Thatcher says, "Socialism's great until you run out of other people's money."
Yeah.
It's
It's not a
socialism's
sustainable.
great until you run out of other people's stories as well, right?
Right.
You
Yeah.
don't
Still,
have your own. It's a tick. It has to suck on the blood of something else.
did
When
we
it
ever
dries out its host, then it
it's
needs to
done.
be revived, and so
It's
it
a
brings
cancer.
Christians in to revive it. So that's why we need we need our we need to joyfully learn the craft, get good at the job, and be telling stories that just point out reality. Say, look how beautiful that is.
Did we ever
That's our argument.
I don't know if we ever talked about I don't know if we ever talked about Buzz Lightyear on the show. Did we ever talk about Buzz Lightyear on the show? I don't know if I don't remember.
Yeah, I think we did. I
Yeah, I
think we
just
did.
we were just talking about like the fact that I think I might have said that, it's such a lie, but you won't figure it out but for 20 years.
Right.
Right. So,
Yeah.
if you're a kid watching a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old or 6-year-old watching Buzz Lightyear, when the receipts come, you're going to be really, really ticked that a woman and a woman can't have a baby.
Right.
And the reality of that you've lived with that moral imagination shaping that reality, and there's no joy there. There's no, the life is just drained out of you because that's not sustainable at all. You're not designed that way. The world doesn't function and flow that way. Everything is fighting against you in nature. And you're fighting that way because your moral imagination is shaped that way. And then when the receipts come, you're like, wait, Disney lied to me. Like the
Right.
whole world has been lying to me. And it's like, no, 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 no. Your moral imagination was shaped by something that was a lie, and you've been lying to yourself with that story. So it's not sustainable. You're going to come to a point in your life where you're like, that doesn't work. It can't work. And then
Right.
you're going to have given up your own life. It's going to make you super bitter. We're going to have a bunch of angry, bitter, nasty people who have believed a particular worldview, and they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to get it anyway. And that's what we're
Yeah.
running into with the trans stuff. I'm going to get it anyway. Give me the knife. Give me the book that I can choose. Eugenics has to come back. It's not an accident that eugenics is coming back to where it's being popular again, because the moral imagination is being shaped by what it is I should be able to have, because that's what I
Right.
want, because that's what Disney sold me, right? Like, your moral imagination is going to require a eugenic type of culture to get what you want. It's going to push that envelope. And so,
Right.
go ahead. I want to ask you another
Well,
question, move on, but I'll let you talk on that for a
yeah,
second.
I mean, I think the temptation is going to be to embrace a Napoleon, right? That
Who,
promises
on one side or the
embrace,
other.
yeah, on one side or the other, that promises, give me enough power and I'll make it so.
Yeah.
And that's always the temptation, is to say, oh, okay, apparently we haven't gathered enough power into one man's hands, and that's just not good.
Jason, when I think about, so when I became reformed, there's a lot of things that happened. I was coming from the charismatic church, and my hunger for doctrine, I don't remember thinking what's shaped me, my moral imagination. Those are like presuppositional things, right? That's a presupposition way before you start operating. Those things have already shaped you, informed you, and so you just operate a certain way.
Yeah.
But when I started finding apologetics, it started letting me know that there was things that I didn't know, and so the stuff that I don't know, I can't operate on. I think Pastor Wilson a couple Sundays ago was talking about this. He said, imagine that, as soon as you said your prayer for repentance and God saves you, an angel comes and knocks on the door and hands you a bag. And that's just like the greetings, like, and amen, ding. All right, here goes your Christian package. Here's your package. Have a great day. And the angel drops off the bag, and you got the bag. And you're like, oh, cool. And you're so excited about the moment. You take the bag and you put it aside, and you keep going about your Christian life, right? 10 years pass, you never open up the bag. And so one day you come across this bag in the closet, and you're like, oh, I got this Christian bag. That's right, that angel did bring that to me. and you open up the bag and you find a checkbook in there. And that checkbook has a balance of over $10 million. And he asked the question, how long have you been a millionaire?
Right.
You've been a millionaire
All
since
this
the
time.
time, since the first amen, right? And the doorbell rings and it hands you the bag. And you don't operate on it until you know, right? Like when you realize it's like, oh, I have a checkbook that can do some things, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I think in the context, I think he was talking about prayer, but also, but I thought that was excellent because there's a lot of that comes along with that is with knowledge of what you have and what's going on. You can look at the context and be like, oh man, God, I have these things. I can operate in this now. And that's what it was like for me becoming reformed is, man, there's a whole nother world of Christianity that I don't even know about, have never been privy to. And I've been operating in this inside the introductory room, right? Like it's like a gaming. I walk into the main room and you suit up and you're like, this is the main thing. It's like, no, there's other levels and stages. This is just entry level where you get your sword and your shield and your cloak
Right.
and you walk out. But I've been operating like this is normal or this is the real world. And so when I found Reformed, I was like, man, all this knowledge, all this information, and I've got and then I found out about the Reformation. Oh wow. Reformation, we've been here before. I started realizing that the charismatic movement was basically early Catholicism. It was just like, oh, we've been here before. We're in church, and a pastor would bring out a red bag that had glow sticks in it, and that you can plug in. And he would say, hey, this has helped my prayer life. And so if you want to have a strong prayer life, you plug one of these things into the wall, and at night it will light up and it will cause you to get on your knees and pray and strengthen your prayer life. And I want to sell you one of, no, he didn't say sell. And I want to bless you one of these for $50. So anybody who wants to have a strong prayer life, bring $50 up here. And that was, it was so normal. Like we would have handkerchiefs that were anointed. You want a miracle? Well, this one had miracle written on it and it had the anointing oil attached to it. And that was a $20 handkerchief. And you had $150 handkerchief. You want a new car handkerchief? We sell you the
$14.98 Roman Catholicism.
That's what it is. That's exactly what it was. It was just Catholicism. But because of our ignorance, we had no idea that we were completely opposed to Catholics. We were like Catholicism, we would never do that. And we're practicing it right then and there in our church. We had no concept of it. And so, but I got so wrapped up into the knowledge and the information of Reformed theology that I never got into, I'm starting to now in the last 10 years, maybe understanding the fruit of the Reformation. So when we talk about Reformation in anywhere, you pick any group that has a conference that is talking about the gospel, they pick out justification, sanctification, interlapsarianism. They'll pick out all the doctrinal issues of the Reformation and talk about the importance of those, but they never talk about what the Reformation produced in culture.
Yeah.
They never talk about law at all. They act like just justification was the issue, and that's in some sort of spiritual environment about the Reformation, but they never talk about justification as it relates to political science. Right? They never talk about justification as it relates to art. They never talk about the Reformation's impact on society and culture and what the Reformation actually produced in people and beauty. They never talk about that. And so I guess part of what I want to ask you is like, we have one of the professors at NSA said, I asked him, why do we study Latin? What's the point in studying Latin? And he said, Knox, we have found Calvin's works in Latin, and we act like that's all there was. He's like, there are so many other works that we have not even begun. He said a mountain of works that we haven't even begun to translate that had to do with society and culture and education and beauty and art and science that we have not even begun to delve into because we're stuck at the entry level of theology.
Right.
He's like, and there's so much more. And so it made me wonder, what did the Reformation give us that we never talk about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was, this last Sunday morning, I was reading through the Institutes, and Calvin talks about the importance of the liberal arts in expanding your imagination to be able to enjoy the world that God made. Right?
Interesting.
This is John Calvin, and we don't we don't do that. And he said, and he says, just bumping into it does a lot to expand your ability to enjoy. He said, but imagine drinking deeply out of the at that well.
Mm,
So you know, that's what the Reformation wanted for everybody, right? They wanted everybody to have their imagination expanded. I mean, that's one of the things that I think actually studying Latin or a different language does, is you suddenly start to be able to expand your imagination into multiple arenas that were unavailable to you before, right? So if you are you know, you learn, say, Spanish, and you start to be able to think in Spanish, and you see a whole nother set of metaphors, a whole nother set of connections that people have made in the past, poetic connections, because that's what language offers us. And it expands your imagination to be able to think in a broader and deeper way. And I mean, that's why uh, even the guys who did a lot to destroy Christianity in the West, they studied the classics, because they and learned to think, you know, expanded their imagination to the point that they could think outside of the normal ways of doing things. But they were thinking against reality rather than with reality. Our job is just to figure out reality and then enjoy the beauty of it, display the beauty of it, tell stories and write poems and songs and create art that displays the beauty of it. And that's what the reformers did. I mean, that's what the Reformation caused, I guess you'd say, that made it so potent, so effective. You know, the if you just search for the Dutch masters, for example, and look through the painting that the Reformation inspired, you can see how you look at that and you think, "Oh, I want to be a part of that movement. What is that?" Right there. And but what did they do? Well, they restored painting painting people as you found them, right? So they moved away from kind of the Neoplatonic painting of the High Middle Ages or the Late Middle Ages, and towards a realistic painting style that really is beautiful, because they captured the beauty kind of everyday things, the beauty of everyday people. And you had the same movements in poetry because of the Reformation. And this is uh, Marilyn Robinson. The book I'm reading right now is called "The Givenness of Things," and she's got a whole essay on. She's a writer, she's a novelist, but just a whole essay on why she's so grateful for the Reformation, because the Reformation is what made novels possible. Novels, novel means new, or but and it also means small. You know, um, so it's a new form of literature that picks up the small things about life and rejoices in them.
mm,
So the novel is literally not possible without the Reformation, because you um because the novel, or because the Reformation exalted normal people into positions of importance, not not into political positions of importance, but that the normal life of your average person became something that was worth enjoying.
mm,
You didn't have to speak Latin, you didn't have to become a monk, you could go home to your family and live a fulfilling Christian life, in the day to day. So one of the important books was called Pierce Plowman, and it's about a plowman's um, it's a long extended poem about a plowman trying to figure out how to serve God as a plowman. It's the equivalent of saying, um, you know, the Reformation is a Reformed Christianity is a religion for truck drivers, right? That's the plowman and is sort of the truck driver of that age, right? Blue collar worker, uh, just living the normal life, who he goes out and loves to come home, right? That and it gives meaning to that person's life. They don't have to um, go to seminary. They don't have to speak Latin. They don't. They could. They're exalting that normal everyday life into an important into a position of just as important as whatever the king does, because before God, they have the same sort of relationship, and they've each got a calling, and that calling is is of equal value, right? So
Like
the Janet,
that's like
yeah,
vocation. That's what
yeah,
Luther talked about with vocation, right?
right, the doctrine of vocation, but it was a whole metaphysical restoration of an earlier understanding
Mm,
that had been lost in the High Middle Ages, right? Because you go back to uh, Dante, Chaucer, Boccaccio, these previous Christian authors who didn't really necessarily like the papacy much, all of them, uh, and they're writing those kinds of stories. Just there's a story about your average, baker, your average guy,
right.
working, or a story about a woman who loses 2, 3 husbands and has to remarry, right? She doesn't hold an office. She's not the queen. She's not anybody, but her life is valuable enough to tell the story of. Well, that Christian humanism that it explodes and spreads throughout the entire Reformed world, and so you get the novel, you get the poetry, poetry that's about everyday life. You get poetry that starts to be in the average language that people speak in, because they start to recognize the poetic beauty of everybody, of even the smallest life. Um, the smallest, least important life actually has a poetic beauty in when it reflects reality, and that's something that the Reformation restores or really brings to its peak in the West. And so, Marilyn Robinson basically says, "I'm grateful for John Calvin because I couldn't do what I do if it weren't for the fact that he reminded us that the average person speaking French and serving the Lord is a beautiful thing." Right. That's why we have novels, story, and that's why Jane Austen is after the Reformation, and you don't have anything like it before the Reformation. That's why you wouldn't have Harry Potter if it weren't for John Calvin. That's
Yeah, there's a lot of Christians' mind just went.
oh yeah, and I
Never.
mean that is a good thing. Just
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
What else is what else? So you got literature. What else is because when we started talking last night, I had to get off the phone with you because you had brought this up, and I was like, "Don't say anything else. I do not want to do this show." But I was trying to think of other things that we got from the Reformation that we don't know because and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the theological foundation was the beginning marks of something else that was radical in culture and society, but we don't think about it that way. We think of Reformation being something that is just church focused, right? I mean, we think of it just being seminary bred, forming and shaping of um, a ecclesiology, right? Like, and
Right, yeah,
but we don't have it for anything else outside of that. We don't see Reformation for society. You
yeah.
know,
Well, I mean, I think this is what's
you
so
done took your coat
interesting.
off. You
I
must about to get real now. You done took your
yeah,
coat
it
off.
is.
It's like, oh snap.
So, um, the normal pattern throughout the church is that the pastor preaches sermons, the people in the pew are transformed, and the people in the pew go out into the world and they transform the sphere that God has given them. Right. And that happens in all of the different spheres. So you've got some of the um, some of the great businessmen in the history of America uh, were very strong Christians, and and they started businesses that said, I want to start the kind of business that Paul talks about when he says, work hard with your hands so that you can be generous. No longer steal, but instead work hard with your own hands so that you can be generous. And they took a lot of the stories from the Proverbs really seriously, but also the stories from the Gospels really seriously. And they said, how do we build a business that reflects these realities? But you also have a a lot of the music that ends up being really transformative throughout the world grows up out of the church. So you've got some of the kinds of music that were really
Sorry.
popular weren't directly out of the church, like the Sousa style marches and things. Those don't really have a church root. But the we literally call it gospel music still. That's been one of the most influential forms of music. Soul music that comes out of that, rock and roll comes out of that. The um, a lot of the early rap um, comes out of the that that call and response tradition within the church. And so the just 20th century music is a major influence on the music. It is the fact that they learn their music from church, or the music at church is so great that it doesn't stop at the doors. It flows out. And you see it in a lot of the
You
country
know,
music, country blues. They're singing out of Ecclesiastes. Their early stuff is based on the Bible, and it flows out because it's so good. They want to hear it again. Let's hear it again in the afternoon. Let's hear it again during the week. Let's and it hits the circuit because it's so good. So 20th century music, I think, is a good example of how that works. Now, it ends up a lot of it because there isn't because the church doesn't retain its backbone through the 20th century. Um, a lot of it then ends up getting uh, used for ulterior
well, the
motives.
pastors. We
Yeah,
lost the. I mean, we lost the pastors. I was just reading. Gabe brought it up yesterday. I don't know. I was gonna see if it was over here. I was gonna grab the article, but Gabe brought it up yesterday. The pastor at Saddleback Church, the new pastor now, has just, um, I think, ordained his wife to be a co-pastor with him or something like that. And yeah, and so you lose the churches, you lose the
yeah,
pastors, and then of course whatever then is produced there, it's still going to have an impact into the society, right? It's
right.
got
Well, yeah, the waters flow that direction. That's it. So when we start trying to bring the uh, bring the waters of the world back in, you get really stagnant, ugly society, because the waters are flowing out of the church, right? And so when you're trying to also bring the world's water in order to make it flow out, you get really ugly ponds, very scummy ponds.
yeah, I don't part of what scares me about there's a couple of things. I want to talk about how we get what does the Reformation look like now and the beginning of that. I kind of want to talk about if Walt Disney were alive right now and he had the same sort of attitude he had when he wrote Jungle Book, what would he make? I want to I want to get there, but why is it that the way that we can look at the Reformation now, if we let's say that we had a Reformation happening in America right now, the way that people's minds are, they wouldn't expect that Reformation to have any impact on society whatsoever.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Right. They would expect a whole bunch of people to be transformed and regenerated and renewed, but they just think that that would somehow be locked inside of this church walls or inside of a home. They have no impact on that. It would actually, what I'm basically saying is they have no post-millennial understanding of the gospel.
Right.
Like their gospel doesn't really impact and affect the world in a way where society changes, art becomes more beautiful, technology advances even beyond because of how it serves man in honoring God and made in the image of God. They don't have an imagination where pastors started preaching in such a way where they believed the word of God, honored the word of God, and proclaimed it boldly, that God really does forgive people. And they wouldn't expect, though, that if that Reformation started happening, if it started hitting this politics and those other things, they would be like, what's going on? Right.
Right.
You know,
And what's nice is it actually does whether we want it to or not. So that's just, you know, the way
but,
reality works.
yeah,
But
but then we fight it, though. But
yeah,
then
we
we
do.
fight it.
We do.
You know, Jason, I remember having fights with people 20, 15 years ago. You know, I can't believe it's that long now. 15 years ago, and even watching 20 years ago, this kind of disconnect between the gospel, the proclamation of the gospel, and the civil magistrate and the civil world. I remember watching people just sever those two.
Right.
And now that I think COVID is a huge marker, but now that COVID is happening and this snowball has gotten so big, they're looking at it and saying, wait a second, that's a problem for my church. Right.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think though, this is there are people that want reformation or that seek reformation because they want America restored.
Mm,
And that's the hope for them, right? America restored is the hope. And so we need the church to get it together so that America can be restored.
mm,
But that is not the way the gospel actually works, right? When we think, when that's sort of the right-wing worldliness, when we think we need Jesus because he will be best at accomplishing our goals, um we end up uh we end up often setting ourselves against Jesus in Jesus' name. Because
mm,
Jesus doesn't come in and say, hey, what do you need from me? All right. I actually heard a term um that Dennis Prager uses, which was really interesting because I don't know much about Dennis Prager, uh, but he said a lot of modern people think of God as a giant butler in the sky, right? So he says, "What do you need from me?" And and he's like, "That's just not the God of scriptures." And I thought, wait, I don't actually know Dennis Prager, and that was surprised me that he would say something like that.
yeah.
But it's honestly because I don't know much. I just have, uh, but that is actually really one of the biggest problems in modern conservative Christianity is that we say we really need we have lost control and lost power. Lord, restore us to a powerful position so that we can be in charge again, and that would be much better. Um,
Mm,
or America is falling apart. It's not like it was when I was young. Um, Jesus, come fix America and put it back to the way that I liked it. But the problem is we're supposed to be submitting ourselves to Christ's lordship, not asking him to put to restore our lordship, if that makes sense.
mm,
Um, and uh, politics is downstream from the culture, and politics is downstream from the storytelling. And the culture is the heart of culture is the stories we tell. But the we don't get to, because it's downstream. Our job is to worship the Lord, serve him well in the calling that he's given us, become the best Christian that we can, and do the best job in our calling, and trust the results to him, knowing that they'll be there, but knowing that they're not going to be controllable. Like
Mm.
the results are like it's like going to the zoo, and um our job is to go take the locks off all the cages. Who knows which animal is actually going to push the gate open, how that which animal is going to be end up where? That's not our job to decide. Our job is to go release the lions and the tigers. Right. I mean, preach Jesus, preach the gospel, and then be transformed by the renewing of our mind, and be as good at our calling as we can be. As good a Christian as we can be, and as good at our calling as we can be, and leave the results up to the Lord. So, um, and I think that's always the difficulty, is that takes faith and hope. We don't have a lot of hope, and I think that's why we end up not releasing the lions.
I think I'm working with some of your metaphors here.
I just piled them together.
Yeah,
I
you
piled them
just
together real
and
hard.
and I'm making them work. I'm just seeing myself in the zoo running from a bunch of animals.
Yeah, so here's an example just in my industry. Um, I get a lot of people that say, Okay, the Lord has given me a story to tell." Right? So, here I am, I'm ready to tell the story, I need some money. You say, "Well, are you good at storytelling yet?" Right. "Well, this will be my first screenplay." "Well, have you written it yet?" "No, I haven't written it yet." "Well, let's write it first and see if it's any good. Let's and then you can improve at your craft.
Mm.
First, if this is the most important one, maybe you should write 20 other screenplays first, and come back to this one when you're good at the craft." Right? Because um
Nah, that's gonna
yeah,
take too
right.
long, Jason.
It's going
That's
to
gonna
take
take
too
too
long.
long. God
Right?
gave me a
The
gift. You know what I mean? I gotta use
exactly.
this gift, man.
Right. So that's the not getting good at your craft side. The other side is, "Hey, we've got to get out there. This is a storytelling fight, and I need to write a great story that um, puts on display this particular truth that is being fought." So I'm going to go write a really, really um, important story about to try and push culture a particular direction, right? But then they're not they're not growing in the Lord, and so the story's not flowing out of them like it's a true story from them, because they aren't the a strong enough Christian to tell the story that they're trying to tell. And so it feels like propaganda, or it is propaganda, right? It's
Mm.
The story is in service of an idea, rather than the story being in service of your audience. Right. You come to a story to be entertained, moved, to have to enjoy reality, right? Or enjoy, or to escape from your life, the hard parts of your life or something. But there's all sorts of reasons that people come to a story. To have your mind changed is not one of them, right? It,
That's
that
what, but you know what though? This is interesting because I think that's exactly why documentaries have been growing over against other
on the
forms of
right, yeah,
storytelling. Yeah, on the right,
right,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. Well, the left too, they've done that well, but their documentaries tell better stories than ours do sometimes. Well, most times I
Sometimes,
think. I think I would give them most times their documentaries. They when they did the 13th is not a conservative doc at all, but they're making a very, very valid point, and
right,
they're telling a great story in the process, right?
yeah, yeah. Well,
I
but I think that's what it's because they believe it, right? They live according to it. They're and this is something that a lot of Christians, um they want to tell stories that are important, but they don't want to live an important life, and dig in, and by that I mean love your family, love your kids, have a good marriage, um, you serve the people in your church, you be good and be a good neighbor in your neighborhood, right? All of
Man,
those things, those are the transformative things that make you into the kind of person that can be good at your job. Because so here, think of it this way: Adam was given a job in the garden, and then God says he's not going to be able to do it, right?
mm,
I'm going to send him the help he needs. Right? The help he
Jungle
needs,
Book, Jungle.
right,
Okay, okay.
is is Isha, or the woman who eventually becomes Eve, right? But to he needs to become the kind of man that can move Isha into Eve, can move a woman to a mother. He needs to become that kind of man that brings a woman into his mission, and she joins him and says, "Ooh, okay, now we've got a mission together," right? And gives him the gift of joining his mission. That he needs to become that kind of man to be able to do the job that God gave him to do, but he can't do it as the Adam that before he goes to sleep and has his rib pulled out. He can't do it when he's the Adam that first sees Eve. He can't do it unless he becomes the kind of Adam that protects Eve well, and
Mm.
and then seduces her well into motherhood, right? Like he needs to be transformed into a different Adam to accomplish the mission that God gave him when he was the Adam that couldn't accomplish it. We
So
don't want to be transformed to become the kind of people that can accomplish the mission that God has given us. We want to just run out and do it
would you say that
by
Adam had
force.
would you say that Adam had to go through death and resurrection to become that? So that was part of the protection? Or could it happen, so he had to go through there's two options here as I see it. Adam, by defending and fighting for and protecting Eve, that matured him into that kind of man, right?
It would have, yeah,
Would
right.
have. Or Adam dying for Eve would have, right? So those are the two options. So doing both. So let's say that Eve ate the fruit. Adam comes in here, kills the serpent, stands before God and says, Lord, I take responsibility for all of this. I let this happen. Forgive me. Forgive her. Take it out on me. And given
Take it out on me
himself,
instead. Yeah,
yeah, take it out on me instead. I'll die for her, right? That
yeah,
makes him the kind of man that Eve says, wow, right? Um, and so we see that in Christ,
yep.
right? We see that
I
type, you know.
Yeah, and the other option was he gets killed fighting the dragon, right? Like so, but I think
Ugh,
one way or the other, it's the death
death
and
was in his cards.
the death was in his cards to be transformed into the kind of man that could
Ugh,
get the wisdom from Eve that God had hidden there, that he needed to be able to garden the world.
Jason, I want you to find a roll of duct tape and wrap your face twice with it around your mouth. Just, I don't like what you just said here because I really don't. No, I'm not even joking. Like, because what you just said is that men have no option but to fight and die, period. That's your
Right.
only options. That's the only options you have as a man is fight and die. Now,
And
there's resurrection.
yeah, that because that's what love looks like. That's because that's what your wife needs. And that's
Ugh,
she's the point. She's the
like you.
wisdom. Right.
Don't you have something to do? I mean, ugh.
I I do. I've been trying to learn to write jokes. I've been sending you my
It's
I've
not
been s-
working. It's
I've
not.
been
This is not funny, Jason. This
I've been
is
sent I've been that last joke I sent you was pretty funny. Did you even read it?
no. Which one?
I think I sent it Sunday morning.
Oh, it's oh, it's in my back pocket.
I've been
No,
trying
so,
to write a bit a day in the mornings.
you know,
And so Sunday I wrote one that cracked me up, so I sent it to you.
I'll look at that. I'll go look at that one. But the that model, that process is not something that's changed.
Mm-mm.
You don't. You're not getting out of that. That's, we talked about wisdom. It's like you don't get wisdom apart from death and resurrection, right? That's how you get wisdom. Um, Somehow in the modern mind, our current understanding. This is why stories are so important. This is why, you know, um, Chaucer and reading about knights and the kind of men that fight for a woman's beauty. All that stuff is in there.
Mhm.
All that
It
stuff is
is.
shaping us. But somehow in our current culture, we've got the idea, man, we're all transed up.
Yeah.
We got this idea that a woman isn't worth dying for and that a man can do something other than fight and die.
Right.
Like there's some sort of avoiding, and what we're acting like is Adam in that same way, avoiding that responsibility to defend and protect our bride. Shoot, we don't even hardly want to get married anymore, let alone
Right.
protect and fight and die.
And make a safe place for our wife to go through her deaths and resurrections. I mean, that
Uh, right.
to I mean, because the culture fights just as much the deaths or resurrections that God gives to women that turn them into vessels of wisdom. Um, it's the death and resurrection is, or the death is the thing that our culture hates, and so we won't. And the church has not done a good job of preaching the resurrection so that we
But
can
aren't
face down the death, so
there
we can have the courage, right? We don't, there's no courage in the church anymore.
but they are preaching a demonic form of this death and resurrection though. It's just
On the, yeah, in the world.
in the world, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, abortion, that's all that is. It's a death, you something needs to die for you to live, right?
Yeah.
It's a death resurrection there. I mean, it's inescapable, right? Um, and the man isn't anywhere in this. It's the seed of the woman that is, right? They've removed him out of the way. And it's like, oh, death, the baby dies, the seed of the woman and the seed that your progeny, they're gone. The woman, she gets to live and the serpent has run off with the woman, like
Yeah.
the
Right.
and then if you don't like who you are and you need to be transformed, then we have a project and a product for you, says Vanderbilt. Like there is the transformation is still happening. It's just transforming us into death
Yeah.
and
Well,
something other than human. It's you know what I mean? It's
because unless you have a God that raises the dead, then the
why
death
would
is
you
just a death. Yeah. Right. So
why don't man, we don't
I mean, so I I'm teaching through the Apostles' Creed in the Sunday school of my church right now, and one of the things in the Apostles' Creed is I believe in the resurrection of the body, right? The resurrection of the dead, and it literally is just not taught anymore. But it's in the first liturgical poem that was used by the church. It's the resurrection of the dead is in there. The resurrection of Christ is in there, and then our resurrection, our coming resurrection, is in there. The and then it that to become clearer as the creeds go on, you get the resurrection of all things, right? So the
right.
you we but we don't teach that anymore. There are doctrines that used to be at I mean, like Christ's descent into hell is another one of those doctrines that used to be considered so central to our hope that we reminded ourselves of it every week. And now you can't find one in 100 pastors that can tell you what it is.
No, actually they avoid that as
They
much as
Right.
possible
They
because it's
avoid
such
that
a
one.
hard. Yeah, yeah.
So, and in the Protestant tradition, I think the other line that has gone away. Well, you've got a couple. I believe in baptism for the forgiveness of sins, so that one goes away. Um, and what's ironic is it's the only line in the creed that's taken directly from the scriptures. Everything else is a summary. That's a statement taken directly from the scriptures, and so and then um, when I read through the Apostles' Creed, I had somebody say, my the church I grew up in took out the line, the the Holy Catholic
Catholic
Church.
Church, yep. A
It-
lot of them do.
uh,
Most reforms, or they would do. They kept Catholic is a it's capital C. I think is
yeah, well, I mean, the argument in the Reformation was over capital C versus lowercase
okay.
c
C. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for Catholic, which I think is a worthy argument to have, and I'm a Protestant through and through, and we should fight for the word. Because the question is it a part of the noun or is it an adjective in the sentence, right? So, and then which I believe in, um, the other part of the Reformation was a fight over whether the in I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, does that in, um, it, it, does it also, um, should it all be added to all of the lines I believe in, or just I believe, right? I believe in the Holy Catholic Church, or do I believe the Holy Catholic Church, right? So it's an argument, it's a grammar argument ultimately
That has implications though.
that has implications for all of life and all of society. So that ends up being an authority question. But all of those things, I think, are they're not even that important anymore, because we literally don't hold to barely any of the Apostles' Creed anymore. So um, it's a sad state of affairs.
Jason, I don't want to. I want to get if Walt Disney was around today. I guess it's not even just Walt Disney. But what would be the new Jungle Book? What would that story be? Or what would he make that would say, okay, here's our enemies. These are the people who are coming in. Like, okay, define what the current enemy is, and then what would the story be that we should tell? Okay, three things. Do it like this. What is define the current enemy? What is the moral imagination of that current enemy? So that in the story that it's telling, and then what is the story that we need to tell that creates a better or different moral imagination to fight against that?
I I think that what what has been effective, the church has not been a place that people want to be,
Mm,
and sometimes that's legitimate, other times it's not legitimate, but that's the story that we are currently losing,
mm,
is
mhm,
what is the so something like Footloose, where the um the the church is the people, they're the ones trying to keep everybody from dancing, right? And there was enough of that story rang true to most people. They're like, yeah, that's right, the church is the one trying to keep us from dancing, right? Now, is that the entire is that the story? Is that the actual story in the history of the church? No, absolutely not, right? It's um the I mean, Presbyterians, I love my church, but every time we try and clap along to a song, I have a hard time not just giggling. We don't have any rhythm. We don't have any. It's it's really funny. But
yeah, tell me
the
about it.
the psalmist says, "All peoples clap your hands for joy." And what was funny is men we we mentioned that once to the congregation, like, I know we're bad at this, but it is something we should try to learn. And so now the congregation tries to clap along with songs sometimes, and it's because they're trying to figure out how to be faithful. It's wonderful, right?
Yep,
Because
yep.
the psalmist says clap. Oh, okay, well, I don't know how, I'm not good at that, but I guess that's what we're doing, right? That's the right attitude. And but the church historically has not been uncomfortable with dancing, has not been uncomfortable with art, music, and has been a joyful place. Um, but when we the joy of the Lord is our strength, and when we have walked away from that joy, we've been sometimes legitimately, sometimes illegitimately skewered for being um, joyless, artless. But oh, I should read that poem that we keep trying to get to, the Christmas portions one, because that's what this is about. Should I read that poem?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just want you to answer my question. So yeah, if that answers it, yeah, absolutely. I
Well,
think you're onto
let,
something though when you say like the church isn't the place to be. I think as I go, Aaron Rand's positive world, neutral world, negative world. Have you heard about that at all?
I have heard about it some, yeah.
So 0 to 94 was positive world, that was when Christianity, it was a positive thing to be a Christian. It was the social capital of that was something to be wanted and desired even from companies and everybody and neighbors. Oh, they're all
Yeah.
Christians. It's amazing. Oh, we love Christians. Thank you so much. Oh, come have this job. Neutral world was between 94 to 2014. And that time is when like it really didn't matter. It was one way or the other. There was no social capital from it. There wasn't any negative social capital, but Christians just didn't have any impact in society whatsoever as far as uh, their status, right?
Okay.
So being a Christian wasn't. This is from Aaron Rand. Being a Christian didn't have any ultimate impact, social status whatsoever to a company, to society. From 2014 to current, it's negative world. To be a Christian has a negative influence, impact to culture and society. If you say you're a Christian, it's almost like, oh, you hate people, right? Like, like
Right.
it, you're a hate. And so when you said that, all I could think about was like, that is the current time in life right now, is that Christianity hates people. Christianity is all about power. Christianity uh, uh, isn't fun, whatever it is, it's kind of gotten that negative puritanical attitude to it, that Puritans want to stop you from dancing. They don't want to have a good time.
Yeah.
You know, whatever, there's joy in the world. I mean, it's funny because some of it kind of lines up with how some people are. You can't have a cigarette, you can't smoke, no beer, no wine, none of that stuff.
Yeah.
You don't do that. That's not Christianity. And they've taken all these wonderful things that God has given us and put them in, like, gave it all the secularism into the world and said Christians can have it. So some of it is like almost a fair assessment of what Christianity won't let you, like, we don't have a concept for that in one sense of Christianity. So I think I'm agreeing with you that, yeah, the lie right now is the fact that no one, well, it's not a lie. No one does want to be at the church. There isn't
Right.
anything good coming from it, right? It's not
Well,
culturally formational anymore.
we are critics, not creators. And
Right.
so we're known for is being critics. And I think that's not historically accurate, but it is currently accurate.
Yeah.
Um, and if you think about it, we define even a faith-based movie based on what's not in it, not based on what's in it, right? So the faith-based movie it's family friendly, it doesn't have swearing, it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that, and that's how we know it's a faith-based movie. It's not based on what's in it, it's based on what's not in it. That's exactly um
Wait, wait,
the
wait, wait, wait. Gotta have a gospel presentation. That does have to be in it.
yeah, but the definition of a gospel presentation is so um watered down that that is not even a part. I mean, it's not even a real, I don't know, I'm just showing my cards now, but most of the time it's not even a real gospel presentation. It's because that definition can be so thin, because you have non-Christians that are like, oh, easy money. Um, I'm going to make some faith-based stuff, and all I have to do is follow this list of things and not let it be put in there, and then have them say a prayer at some point, and you don't even, doesn't even have to have good theology, anything. It can be considered faith-based because it's the definition is what's not in it.
Jason, did somebody in the film come to Jesus? Had a bad life, things weren't going well. They hear the gospel, Jesus saves their sins, they repent, come to Jesus, bam. I mean,
There are some of those,
well,
right? There are some of those faith-based movies,
that's a faith-based movie.
but
That's just
there's a lot that are barely they're indiscernible from a Hallmark movie.
right. Yeah, I mean, and so those are yeah, we they lump into our categories
Right.
of
They
faith-based.
lump into our categories because they also follow the list of what's not in it.
Right. I agree.
Right. And so I think that's our problem is we are we're as a people, we're more critical than we are creative. We eat our own creators. If somebody tries to get creative on us, we destroy them. Um and it, it's y- um it's a sad state of affairs, but I mean, are right now Christian creators are all having to go to the Mormons to get their money. So because the church is not a institution that supports creativity as a people. I mean, we're pretty well divided. That has been bad as well. We're not a unified people.
Uh,
So
okay.
but I do think that we're going to get unified real quick when we get thrust to the back of the bus. Then we just got to figure out how to get along well enough to turn the back of the bus into a party.
So you say the narrative now is that no one wants to be a church. So that's the
Yeah, so I think we need to tell stories that are true, that are joyful, and that have going to church as a normal part of life. It's just a normal part of life that they're not church stories. I mean, they can be church stories where things happen at church, but they're just life stories in which church is normal and joyful and fun and all those things. I mean, I'm
no one, you know what though? No one would know how to tell that story. I can't think of
we do have a pilot episode that's almost done.
yes we do. Yes, we do. I was thinking of Outside of Us.
But yes, you're right. I don't think we know how to tell the story because for one, the Christians are like really quick to cancel somebody if they, you know, even say one little thing about Baptists or something.
Would you know a guy?
I know a guy. Christians are so quick to cancel someone. They're so cynical. They're so we are so critical that somebody that's taking a risk storytelling wise thinks twice. Do I really want to tell this joke? Do I really want to tell this story? Oh, well, I'm going to get a lot of flack from my people, right? From my people. It's one thing to say like, oh yeah, the it's one of the scripts I'm working on right now. I know that the progressives aren't going to like, but I don't. That doesn't bother me. But I do want my people to like it, right? I want to serve. I want to serve my people. Um, and it's uh, it, I, so you're right. As I'm writing jokes, I'm thinking, I what. So I
I
wrote
don't
this
think it
joke.
works like that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was just writing this joke that I thought was really funny. You could tell me if you think it's funny, but it's a guy was talking to uh, a, well, here I'll just read it. You can tell me if you think that this is a funny joke or not.
All right, on the
And
spot. Here we go.
right on the spot, right? So I'm putting it into this was as I'm working on this script, um, hit this thing where it's um okay uh so it's just guy says, "Oh, you might not believe it, but I do get how the gays feel coming out of the closet." He said, "I had to let Twitter know that I was a conservative." Yeah, and he said, "Hey, Nazi, destroyed any women's rights lately?" It's basically, "Hey, faggot, you get AIDS yet?" Then he says, "Though, admittedly, my coming out was a little less AIDSy." Right? Right? So I'm writing this joke, and immediately I was like, can I say any of this? Am I
Uh,
allowed to say any of this? No. Is it funny?
if it was for
Yeah.
Dave
Is
Chappelle, maybe,
right, right. I know,
you
right?
know, like,
So, and I thought, but this is this. I was thinking, how would these two particular people in this script actually come up against one another? What would the conversation really be like in real life? You know, you've got a guy that just doesn't, that he's trying to say, no, I get it. We're actually a lot the same.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what would that really look like in real life? And then I was like, and I cut it because I
Right,
was
because
like,
you well,
I can't.
I don't think
I don't think
society or any side would allow,
no
like,
no side is gonna like
no,
that,
no, no,
right?
no, no,
Yeah,
no side is gonna like that.
no
That
side's gonna like that. But
I disagree with you though on one thing though, Jason. I don't think that you have to write things that Christians like in order to be able to influence them.
I don't think so either. But I do
Right.
think that they're the people that I want to serve, right?
Yeah,
Um,
but these are people who are secretly privately watching Game of Thrones.
I think that's probably true. And if but they have a different
I watch Jason.
they have a
I
different
watch these folks. I'm sorry, man. I just got it. I watch these folks complain about every episode of the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power,
right,
because
because
they
they know it,
watched
because they
it.
watch it, yeah. But they have there's a different standard if it's a Christian making the art.
Um, well, it depends on how much they knew about that. I mean, but if you were still making that, I don't think they would watch it and then they would be like, "Oh, this is horrible." You know, episode 3, episode
May
4,
maybe,
episode
but
5.
you know, as I'm writing, right, like there comes a point where you're writing you know, a character that's quoting another character, right, and speaking a certain way, um and and Christians will say, man, Christians can't write something like that, right? Because
No,
that's
you're
not
right. They get it Doug about that when he wrote Ride Sally Ride. He wrote his characters and they got mad at the way that his characters interacted, and it's like, but that's actually how that character would
right.
interact.
And
And
when somebody says the wrong thing, one of the ways we learn to not talk a certain way is because we see people say the wrong thing, and we learn, oh, that's not right. But if we never put that into our stories, we never get that wisdom, right? But Christians don't have wisdom to, because of the critical nature in which we approach, not critical, because we're critics in the way that we approach art, and not connoisseurs, not human beings that are, uh we don't even know how to, we want bad guys that aren't even bad enough. I mean, that are
right, right.
either they are the devil incarnate, and so it's okay, you know, they're Sauron, so they can be killed, and that's, which is fine. I love Lord of the Rings, so you can have that. They're comfortable, but Christians are comfortable with a Sauron, or they're comfortable with somebody that's just, they're not really that bad, and because they don't say anything that I wouldn't want my kids to hear ever, and you know, so there's no way to write truthful stories that truthfully reflect reality.
That-
I mean,
No, I hear
we do kids shows really well, which is important. That's not a bad thing.
we do kids shows really well.
Yeah,
No, we
we do.
don't. No, we don't.
We yeah, maybe not.
We
I
don't
mean,
do kids shows really well.
well, there's a lot of Christians that work on the kids shows, are out of the, you know, that are being made right now.
Yeah, but those aren't Christian kid shows.
That's true.
That
We probably don't do Christian kids shows really well.
No, you know, the thing that like part of I see what, man, this is a different conversation. It has so many. So then are you saying
Now
then
you've got
that,
me just speaking all my frustrations. That's what you're doing.
well, you know, this is a counseling session sometimes on Knox Unplugged.
Yeah.
Usually it's for me. Now it's
Help
for
me.
you.
Help me.
But are you saying that Walt Disney could not make anything right now that would have impact in society
I don't
to
think,
fight
yeah,
against whatever the woke stuff and all the other Marxists? I
I
mean,
don't think I don't think so, because I think what we need now is stuff that is explicitly Christian
to
and
rebuild those so you're
well
saying
done. Yeah.
we need a reformation to even get there first.
Yeah, right, so he was preserving something that was still there in society, right? He was
Mm.
fighting for something that was still there. He was adding salt, um, to the meat so that it wouldn't go bad. The meat now is gone. So what we actually need is to raise cows again. We need to build ranches, right? That's a church thing. But
This is why what you were talking about earlier. This goes back to your family thing. This goes back to your church. This we are, man, Jason. Every time we talk, and the more and more I think about this, we really are 100 to 150 years out. There is We're 3 generations out from the things that we see in Christianity we want to do. We really can't do yet until we have worked through education. I don't see, you know, I don't see how we get there any other way. And maybe as you kind of have to work the both end, the front and the back. You try and preserve one thing and you rebuild the other. Sword and shit and trowel. You kind of have to have both. You got to fight and you got to build. Those two things we don't probably really understand. We're really in a ruin environment. Like we're at the ruins of it. It's not standing anymore. It's destroyed. The ruins are everywhere, and we're acting like we have walls to build and we're picking out drapes. It's like you can't put drapes on this, man. Like
right, yeah,
you don't have a wall to put drapes on.
yeah. You're like, oh, we actually need to pour concrete, right? Yeah, we're in the we're in a phase in which you say, oh man, I didn't protect the house and it burned down.
So then, so then, there is a group of people out there of Christians who are like, man, we need to take back the arts. We need to take back the arts. We need to take back the arts. There's this other group of people out there. It's like, we know what? We just need to preach the gospel, man. We just need to preach the gospel. God didn't tell us to be worried about that stuff. We need to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. We need to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to every area of life, and then let that reformation just do its thing and praise God, and we're out. And you got these two different groups, one on each side, and the two aren't meeting at all.
Right.
Except
I
for
think
in
that's,
politics.
yeah, except for in politics. But that's because we're Machiavellians, and so we're just looking for power. But I think the reality is that we need a reformation, that and artists that are called to the arts to be transformed by the gospel and go out as transformed people into their calling. But we need that for plumbers. We need that for politicians. We need that um, for
Mm,
moms.
yeah.
We need that for school teachers, right? That the gospel transforms them into the kind of people that see the truth, see how beautiful it is, and can put that on display in their particular calling, right? That doctrine of calling is, as we've lost it. And so I think that we have um, we don't have much power at all. Right.
This is what's really gotten me so upset, and I'm happy for all the alternative secular things that I'm seeing being made. But one of the things that bother me about these alternative secular, so we don't need a Facebook, we need a Christ book. We don't need a YouTube, we need a God tube. We don't need, and it's just alternative. And what I'm seeing is a tendency for us to virtue signal just on the other side, instead of
Right.
going and saying, how do we as Christians make something that is just awesome? Right? I don't want to,
Yeah.
right, whatever that is, whatever my skill set is. Um, Barely Biblical, the guy that
Yeah.
at Lore, he one of the things that he said when he was at the conference was, I was at a Fight Laugh Feast conference and I was watching. I was like, man, I can't do any of the things that those guys are doing. So what do I have? What do I do? And I think his wife told him, like, you're an artist. Go
Right.
make art. Like, you go make a cartoon. That's what you do. And it struck me. I'm like, I hope that people are hearing that, like what his wife told him. Like, back to the wife once again, right? Like, there
Right.
goes
Well,
which is like not. not to like what we do across politics, that's what we do. What do you have that you do? I hope God raises up 30 more across politics, and I'm starting to see them pop up everywhere. So I'm
Yeah.
super excited about that. I mean, I'm watching ministries become cultural commentators and talk about legal stuff that they would have never talked about before. John MacArthur is writing letters to the governor. Oh my goodness, praise God, he's a theonomist. I'm so
Well,
happy
one of my
for all
favorite guys
that.
that I follow on LinkedIn is a guy that does pest control, right? He loves his job, and he's always talking about, he's like telling stories. Oh man, I found so many roaches in this house, and this is what I had to do. And like when his stuff pops up on LinkedIn, I get excited because he loves his job, and he just can't wait to tell people. It's like, hey, you want to know how to keep out bats, or whatever the pest is. And you can tell that God called him to this job, and he has been transformed, and he loves it. And I find it encouraging to read his little stories about pest control, because I actually really enjoy my job too. And uh, the so I recognize the joy that he has, but also I'm like, whoa, I never thought of crickets or roaches or whatever it is that he's talking about that way. So I think that's the thing that we don't understand, is that fundamental connection between humans. When you meet somebody, um, you know, I and you find out what they do, and then they tell you stories. There's always wisdom to be learned in there, because it's a human being doing what they're called to do. And there should be a rejoicing in all of that, rather than a which is the most important type of question. Because who knows which is the most important? We don't get to decide that. We just get to do our best at the job that God has called us to, and be transformed by the renewing of our mind in order to charge into that job.
These answers are never satisfying. They're not. They're just not satisfied, because I come from an environment and a culture where um I the mechanism is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the plug and play method. I want it a lot easier than what it is. And it's really just, it's not going to be easy. It's not
Yeah.
going to be just this plug and play setup. That's not how it works. That's not how the world is designed.
Yeah,
Um,
you never get cultural transformation without individual transformation. And that's what we want. We want the culture to be fixed without having to go through the deaths and resurrections in our own lives. As if the culture is something that's real and exists outside of just the people. It's just the habits of people gathered together. That's what a culture is.
Yeah, go find the serpents, man. Go find the serpents in your backyards and start killing
Right.
them.
Yeah.
Right, like that's where you really, I love what Michael Foster is doing, County Before Country. I think that's what he's basically saying. There's a localistic aspect to this thing. It's home first. It's managing that first. It's lording over that first. It's the disciplines there first. It's protecting that garden first, cultivating that garden first, and from that you get something else. And even in the Westminster Confession of Faith, it opens up Thomas Matten, I believe it is, making that argument about society. In 1680, 1646, 47, I think he's making an argument about like society is just gone to crap. And it's because
Right.
fathers and the homes are gone. This is in the 1600s, mid
Right.
1600s. And you're like, whoa, what? He's like, and everybody knows it. He's like, and so he's begging for fathers to do some of the basic things like disciple their kids in catechism questions and the
Yeah.
Westminster Confession of Faith, so that the work of the pastor is easier, that they don't have to deal with such an ignorant base of people about doctrine and things of the Bible and things of the Lord, so that they can build on top of the foundation that's been set at home by fathers and by men.
Yeah.
And then those kind of people go out into society and make good pastors. Those people go out in society and make good journalists. Those people go out in society and make good doctors and good lawyers and good mechanics and then good political leaders. You know, that's we don't. Unfortunately, we have Trump, but we don't get out of Trump unless we raise the next, president. The
Yeah.
next George Washington or whoever else we need
Well,
to.
and I hear a lot of people right now complaining about everything that I see on TV has incompetent dads and has uh, the the dad's a clown and can't do anything right, and I that wouldn't resonate if that wasn't actually a real problem.
Mm.
Like if you watch a show about an incompetent dad and you're like, dads aren't like that, then
Yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah, the story
then
wouldn't.
the story doesn't resonate, right? So the problem is that it's a mirror that's being shown to us, and we think it's a prophecy, or we think it's influencing us. And we're like, the problem is this mirror, and so we go around trying to break the mirrors, paint over all the
Destroy the
mirrors,
mirror. Yeah,
rather than becoming a different, but rather than becoming different, so the reflection is different. So I
and
and
everybody knows it. And everybody,
everybody
yeah,
knows it.
everybody
Yeah,
knows. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'm still in that. That's you expect to hear that on Whitlock. That's coming with me. We want to break the mirror. Whew.
But yeah, I mean, I think we need to become a people that one, I think, support our artists that are reflecting reality to us well, um, and and then be transformed into people that can do our job, whatever it is, better. And I mean, I work in media and writing and arts, and so I'm trying to always go back to the Lord, be transformed, so that when I go to write, it comes out of me naturally. But it doesn't matter what you do; that's what you should be doing.
We're gonna have to get to that poem another time. We keep on Mark
We keep,
Dottie. Doesn't
yeah.
okay. Maybe we make ourselves a promise. Next week we
Next
start
time,
with
yeah,
the poem.
we'll start with the poem, and and it can be the beginning of our conversation.
That's good. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.